to move on to something else. People are involved in the emotional roller coaster, and when things bottom out, we see capitulation. People move on.
Right. No. Yeah, I think. So what is this? I need to know now.
I think we're obviously close to the bottom. Obviously, there's somewhere in the bottom run. Everybody's got the 2 cents, but everything that I look from a technical analysis standpoint tells you that
in like the bigger city, it's getting
happening. There's a lot of things. When I got into
honestly, it's mostly probably
I'm sure that's what you see at the bottom. But that's our stellar. It's pretty amazing.
The whole thing's been
yeah. They had one person that left, Jim left, but he rewrote the code, and their whole like outside of cross-border payments, they basically do a ton of different things.
certain things you can't like this.
Too many people trying to. At some point, someone's going to say,
yeah, I think they're both connected to one segments. Each teller is a non-profit, and so each of the charging, which third world countries, it's its own platform, exchange, doing its own thing, and really, Ripple's main focus is profit companies.
We'll keep going. Basically, people thought
Wires are going to go away because we're paying on some of those transactions, low transactions. So they're total bodies of the banking system. That's what my research shows. Obviously, a lot of these projects involved, they have the potential to do more. They're all just going to tackle different parts of the well, yeah, that was like one of the first partnerships they had. So there's a lot of intertwining there. So I even see them doing a lot of stuff on their own. Building a house on the side. They're letting us kind of come in and trade fairs.
Makes me very excited, but it's getting into
well, I think IBM wants to do a lot of it. They came out and raised money somewhere. I think Mud, the guy over at IBM, he came out and said that after like this one part of the Excel, yeah, IBM is huge. So they have a need for so many products. They have a need for some high level.
that will wear it.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. It's really good to see that partnership. Coming to this last October, and yeah, it's still going stronger and stronger. Obviously, I think it's something stellar. You still want to yeah, I mean, that's the problem. A lot of traders, they're really involved in announcements. You gotta be able to take a step back and buy and sell at the same price. You just watch the trade place and say, this is not 6 months down the road. I have a job, and that may be another I don't got it yesterday. But if you look at the actual fundamentals that are being laid down, it's pretty amazing. It's almost like watching Amazon be built out in 10 years or 12 years ago. In theory, they're operating out of which one? I don't think so. I think it's pretty up to you. It's a matter of what completely decentralized protocol. The problem is something like EOS turned off because like that's not enough decentralization. I look at it and say transaction speeds are really fast. And they can get really fast running on their system really fast. Plasma, sharding, those projects are not 4 weeks up road, projects are down the road. Whereas EOS is really just pumping out projects tomorrow. No, the 2021 picked out of the road, so it's coded. So like you've got, if you have some of those, you have the right to vote, and you vote the 21 workers. They fluctuate. That's right. That's right. It changes all the time. It changes almost every weekend.
That's okay. Oh, no, it's okay. It's okay. Here, sit there. I'll go for it. This is my first time.
How'd it go? There's a lot of great ideas. The ones that
totally not on us.
Hey everybody, if I could have your attention now, it's 7 o'clock. We want to get started. For so those of you that would like to continue your conversations, you're more than welcome to step outside the doors in the back and keep the conversations going. I don't want to kill the networking. We do want to get started. We might get done a little early tonight, so for those of you that are here on time, thank you. You'll get some of the good stuff that we have to say from the Austin Blockchain Collective. Some of you may or may not recognize me. I am not Pete Harris, in case you're wondering. For those of you that come regularly, I don't have the right Southern accent. I think Southern UK is where he's from. So again, thank you all for being here. Some of you may recognize me as the Austin Blockchain Collective Associate Director. Some of you might recognize me as CEO and co-founder of PouchPoints. Tonight we're going to focus primarily on the collective and what's going on, what we're doing. We are live streaming the event. It may not be started right now, but if you have friends or colleagues that weren't able to make it, you can let them know via text. I'll be checking the meetup comments to see if people are able to find it, but it's at Austin Tech Live on YouTube. And if you have trouble finding it there, people could find it via their Twitter link, which is tied back into Capital Factory. So again, thanks for everybody coming out tonight. For our speakers from McGinnis and Lockridge, we'll be introducing them here in a few minutes. And then Nick from Topol. Appreciate you all being able to come out. One housekeeping note, the CEO of Pactum, which is developing a WordPress-like interface for smart contracts, was unable to make it tonight. Because we're all one big community, I'll let you know his father was involved in a car accident. He's had a couple of surgeries since late last week, so keep him in your thoughts and prayers, whatever works best for you, but he will not be presenting tonight. So I have a little bit shorter of a schedule with Nick coming up after we walk through the collective information. So for those of you that are not familiar with the Austin Blockchain Collective, the overall mission as it currently stands is to showcase and advocate for blockchain and crypto innovation in the Austin, Texas area. So if you've been to austinblockchaincollective.com, you're familiar with some of the goings-ons and the different companies that are listed out there. If you have not, we welcome you to go there. Our goal is to keep and put Austin on the global blockchain map, which we've done a pretty good job in Texas. Nick can talk a little bit more about Topol. Maybe you can share a little bit about coming from Houston to Austin as a part of the pilgrimage in blockchain in the US. So we've got more companies coming this way. And as we learn more about other cryptocurrencies settling here in Austin, we'll look forward to announcing those things here. We do want to make a special call out to the patrons of the Austin Blockchain Collective. If you are a company in Austin and you're interested in supporting the collective, please reach out to info@austinblockchaincollective.com. Special thanks to OneChain for their continued patronage and donations to the collective. Keep the site running, keep events going, all the things that are going to be happening going into the Austin Blockchain Month, which I'll talk about here in a few minutes. We also want to thank Dustin Byington, who is currently at a stealth startup. Not quite sure if he's announced the name of the company yet, but we want to thank him for his continued patronage. In addition to that, we have a number of supporters that are also responsible for helping in and around the area of Blockchain Collective. So we want to say thank you to Kilroy Blockchain, especially thank you to Capital Factory, who provides the space and then the live streaming of the event that we have. And then 10 Capital Group, I'll call them out again here in just a few minutes. I have a big event going on tomorrow night around ICOs. So they're kicking off the ICO showcase again coming up tomorrow night. Pouch Points, talked a little bit about myself already. We've got Lighthouse Partners, which is Pete's organization, Massing PR, for continuing to support the public relations for the Blockchain Collective. And then lastly, Cognitive Scale. Thank you for allowing me that commercial announcement. These supporters allow us to do the things we do. So tonight's agenda, the first thing, I'm going to talk a little bit about some notices. These are also available on austinblockchaincollective.com. For those of you that found us via the meetup, you might not be familiar with the website. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll have an opportunity to give some shout outs. So if you're new to Austin, if you're working on a project, you're looking for people to collaborate with, you just want to talk a little bit about what you're interested in doing or why you're here tonight, stand up, tell us a little bit about what you're doing, and we can network with you at the end of the event. So please feel comfortable to say something and look forward to hearing from you. The featured presentation tonight, after we get through with Topol, sorry about that. So we'll have a first short presentation from, it's Topol, correct?
Topol.
Topol? Yeah. Sorry about that. So it is Topol, all right. Yeah. So Topol, I feel like I shouldn't call it top because I see top in the word. So yeah, so Topol.co. So Nick will be presenting on what they're doing, pretty amazing stuff. And he'll come up and do about a 15-minute session, a little bit longer depending on QA. And then we'll have Doug and Shayna, thank you for that. I always want to put the emphasis elsewhere. From McGinnis Lockridge, and they'll be talking about the feature presentation, the cryptocurrencies, ICO, tax regulation. We do need to be out of the room by 9 o'clock. They want to start picking things up. So if you're continuing to network, talking with people, we ask that you would be able to take it downstairs to the bar, and that's a great place. You don't have to buy drinks. You can get some water, Topo Chico or something, and but keep your networking going downstairs. So some notices and updates. How many of you, by a show of hands, are familiar with Austin Blockchain Month? Oh, a few of you. Okay, so about a third of the group raised their hand on that. So in October, and you can learn more about this on austinblockchaincollective.com, we're going to have some critical blockchain event going on a week-to-week basis. We're going to have Austin Startup Week, which is hosted and facilitated by Capital Factory. If you're not familiar with that, we would ask that you take a look at that and start to learn a little bit more about it. We'll have the blockchain track, the Emerge ICO Forum coming on October 9th, and there's about 4 or 5 other things going on that you don't see on the list here. And then lastly, the Texas Bitcoin Conference. I think we're on the 4th year for that, so if somebody knows for sure, correct me, but that'll be towards the end of October. For those of you that are looking to go to Malta, you might want to go to Malta at the beginning of November. There's a big blockchain summit over there where the Prime Minister is hosting it, but that's not related to Austin at this point. But we have a lot going on in the October timeframe. For those of you that are here tonight, how many of you are familiar with voting on South by Southwest panels and presentations by a show of hands? So a few of you. Okay, well, we need your support. You've done this before, so we would ask you to do this again. So if you've got your own session, and you'd like us to vote on that, why don't you post it to the meetup comments, and the rest of us can try to help move that forward. But for those of you that like to see Austin Blockchain Collective, Kilroy Blockchain, Oracle's blockchain panel, etc., at South by Southwest, please get out there and vote on those. You can find all of the Austin Blockchain weekly updates at the medium.com website under Austin Blockchain. Also this week, and the Austin Blockchain write-up, we've got a Is Blockchain Worth the Hype? It's an Eventbrite episode. It's not something that you have to go to. It's going to be online. So if you want to learn a little bit more about, do we need this, do we not need it, what's the hype, something you might want to take a look at, and that's something you can register for via the collectives write-up this week. And then lastly, we want to call out this investor meetup that's being kicked off by one of our supporters, which is 10 Capital. So Hal Martin will be leading this tomorrow. We would encourage you to take a look at that and attend if you have the time.
Where's that going to be?
That's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head. What I'll do is, for the courtesy of everybody else, I'll just reference you to the blockchain Medium posts, and out there we have a full write-up of what's going on this week, and there's a reference there to where that's located. I don't remember the specific location. Great question, though. So again, I mentioned this earlier, austinblockchaincollective.com. If you're tweeting and you're doing something in blockchain, or you've seen something in blockchain in Austin, when you tweet, make sure you add the hashtag AustinBlockchain, because companies like PouchPoints, Kilroy, Massing PR, Frank Robles in the back of the room from Digital Town, they're amplifying. So as we see these things, people are retweeting them and liking them to give a little bit more benefit to the overall community here in Austin. There's well over 100 companies that are doing things or attempting to do things in blockchain for very practical and valuable reasons in Austin. Not all the time, we don't always have time to work with each other on these things, but through things like Twitter and LinkedIn and so on and so forth, we can come together to benefit Austin as a blockchain capital globally. A little bit more on the Blockchain Collective itself. So again, I mentioned the Twitter, we've got our weekly news, the overall community, we've got the blog, and then you're at the meetup today. So won't spend necessarily a lot of time on this, but our goal is to build a community and develop better experiences between the various companies here in Austin. So I will take a moment to do some shout outs, other meetups that people are familiar with. If you have something to say, do you need help, do you want help, are you hiring? But we would want to stay away from ICO pitches. So if you have an elevator pitch for an ICO, maybe head to the meetup tomorrow night. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
and your name too, please.
Bill Kleinbecker, Program Chair of the Technology Advisors Group. Our meetup this month is going to be the CEO and Chairman of Coney to speak about the digital experience application platform. Their company has been a leader in Gartner and Forrester in the mobile development platform, and they are now working on what's been called the fourth industrial age type of technology, like the immersive tech, IoT, that kind of thing. So you can write apps that would span those with one app, with one platform. So it should be pretty interesting, because it's, I think, the next thing for application development.
Where is that being held?
It will be held up at the Spiceworks building, which is on 360. I have here reminders for you. You can go RSVP with them.
Excellent. Connect with them afterwards. We can get connected with Bill and then find out where the event is specifically.
Yeah.
Thank you. Up here, I've got one up here, and I'll come right over to you, sir. Yes, sir. And your name first, too?
Yes, my name is Nevi Erdogan. I am a new kid on the block. I just moved from South Dakota, actually, and I am starting my LLM program next year at University of Edinburgh in Innovation, Technology, and Law, basically writing my thesis about blockchain applications in the legal tech. And hopefully I can connect with some of you guys about the smart contracts, because smart contracts need to become contract before they become smart. And that is why I wanted to learn the legal side of the things as well. And today, hopefully, we'll learn a lot more about that. This is like my introduction class to that. And I'm looking for a job while I'm doing my LLM, so I would love to help support with you guys. I was a venture capitalist in my past life, but when there's ICOs, we need venture capitalists, right? Thank you.
Thank you for that, absolutely. And we'll be sure to get connected with you after the event today. Yes, sir?
Hi, everybody. I'm Niran Babalola. I work at Consensus. We're a venture production studio specializing on the Ethereum blockchain. We're hiring. I work out of the office here in Austin. My team in particular, we're working on a product called Pinvala. And what we're doing is we're taking the secure badge in your browser whenever you're on an e-commerce site, and we're building that for smart contracts. So people actually know if they're interacting with a contract that's safe, or if it's garbage, that somebody run there better. We're hiring all sorts of roles: product managers, engineers, designers, etc. And even if you don't end up working at Consensus, if you're good at working on small teams or building teams from scratch, you should quit your job and find a place to work in this industry.
Oh, wow. Yeah, thank you for that. Absolutely.
One take motion.
That's amazing. So you got one guy hiring here on the back left and one guy looking for an opportunity, so that's a matchup. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a win. No, not Frank. Okay, anybody else? No, I'm just kidding. I love Frank. Please, Frank, stand up and introduce yourself.
Frank Rollis from Digital Town.
No advertising.
Well, I'm going to advertise.
All right, all right.
But because you said job, we're looking actually for a product manager. We're hiring a product manager right now. Our product's kind of interesting. It helps people find local businesses, buy local. We have a digital wallet that helps them do those exchanges, covering 16 currencies, including blockchain. We're planning on adding other tokenized currencies. So it's kind of interesting. It's kind of a movement. We're looking for more people to sign up. Please do sign up for Digital Town. It's a pretty cool app, but we're looking for a product manager if you know of any of those.
Excellent. Thank you, Frank. Thank you for putting up with my shenanigans. Appreciate that.
You know I love you.
Yes, sir. Anyone else? Counting the 5 in my head. Excellent. Well, again, for those of you that are new and those of you that have been many times before, thank you everybody for coming tonight. Thank you for serving the community by participating and hearing what folks have to say. So I think, Nick, we'll go ahead and swap over to you. You've got a PC, you said? Yep. Fantastic.
Yeah, sure, certainly. Let me unplug this. I'll move this out of the way. If you could come park. Do you need power? You think it'll be good? Okay. Do you need a glass of water? No, okay. Yes, sir. Thank you again. Thanks everybody for coming tonight.
Yep, thank you, Joshua, and thank you everybody for allowing me the opportunity to come introduce myself and Topple. My name is Nicholas Edmonds. So what is Topple? So we are actually creating an entire blockchain protocol centered around investing into high yield impact investments and investments in the developing world. So working with the UN, they have developed these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. So anything from ending poverty to improving education, gender equality. The problem is a lot of these problems are very, very hard to accomplish, and they are falling short by about $2.5 trillion annually. The key one is ending poverty. If you just raise the median income of everybody in the world to about $10,000 US, you would hit about $32 trillion in economic growth opportunities every year. The problem is actually getting to that point. So, important question. Has anybody here tried to get a business loan in the US or anywhere? I got one, two. So normally in a normal business loan, you're looking at what, like 15–20% in the US, somewhere around there. Well, the problem in developing countries, you're looking at about 40%. So this presents a very, very big problem to most businesses, as who wants to pay almost half of their business loan back in interest. The real issue involves banks are limited by the national interest rates and their own borrowing costs involved with trying to make these investments. So a nice way would be to source direct investment in these companies, but how do you actually target and find these direct investments and allow them to happen? So Topple steps in, we're creating this entire blockchain protocol that directly and transparently connects these investors to these investments to be made in developing countries. So as part of our process, what we're trying to do is use a prediction market that anybody can interact with to better find these investments. They can better make macroeconomic models and and predictions on these businesses to better provide information to investors to allow them to make smarter investments. Along with smart contracts that allows a clearer way to transfer funds in between investors to these ventures. So we're also introducing the idea of impact credits. So basically an authoritative body such as the UN or somebody can find impact investment opportunities and provide an extra incentive for people to create these impact credits that they can then sell to charitable organizations and stuff like that through our decentralized exchange. So the nice thing is we've actually found quite a few investment opportunities already that we're working closely with, namely in Colombia, India, and South Africa. Through mining operations, clean water, replacing people that are growing coca in Colombia specifically to create cocaine. We're trying to replace that with coffee or wheat. They're already accomplished farmers, they're just farming the wrong thing. So from a technical standpoint, we're building this blockchain specifically for these investments. It's written in Scala and it runs on top of JVM, so that means it's performant and scalable, and it runs on just about any device you can think of. We're also running JavaScript smart contracts, so that way, it's a widely used language. Almost anybody can use these, and it fits nicely with traditional investment contracts and also new novel smart contracts. We're building on top of Ouroboros Genesis, which for those of you not familiar, it is the proof of stake algorithm that Cardano is currently implementing. We're also implementing that into our own. And we'll build the ability to have delegated proof of stake for those that want it. So our actual token is dual use. You either stake it in our system and help us secure the network and you earn transaction fees through that, through the normal proof of stake model, or you can participate in our economic prediction markets, and if you make accurate predictions, you get a profit for that. So we have a Dutch sticking, which will hold 25% of the tokens as an endowment that will be locked away, nobody can touch it, that will be used as a transaction fees to fund further development in the protocol specifically. We'll also have a Dutch office and an Austin office that will be used to further grow applications and development on top of our protocol. So I'll skip over that because that's not what I'm here for. I'm followed by a great team. So Chris, Jim, and Kim all came out of Rice University. Jim and Kim are still in Houston right now finishing up their PhDs. Jim in theoretical and experimental physics, and Kim in economics and statistics. Chris is currently in the Netherlands, finding our community there, working with people to find more economic investments that we're wanting to make in Europe specifically. I'm joined also by my two awesome blockchain engineers, Alex and Yammer, who have been helping me this summer as interns to really get a lot of our features done on our blockchain. So if you want to find out more information, there's a website, topple.co. You can join us to chat with me on our Telegram. Thank y'all for the opportunity for allowing me to present Topple to y'all. Now that y'all know what I'm about, maybe we can work together on finding things I can help y'all somehow. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
You said delegated proof of stake. Are there going to be a certain amount of participants that are going to be allocated to do the voting?
No, so the way it works is in Ouroboros, almost anybody can stake. We are looking at tuning a minimum stake, probably somewhere on the lower end, around 2% or something like that. But there will be no hard limit like 21 delegates or something like that. It'll just be.
So there's no mining?
No, it's forging for proof of stake.
Okay, so it's only 2%. Okay.
Does everybody know what forging is? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, please explain.
Yeah,
Okay.
Quick.
Yeah, so instead of proof of work in Bitcoin, which is mining, where you're spending electricity and just trying to solve cryptographic proofs. Proof of stake is you have a certain number of tokens that you basically lock away for a certain number of time. In Ouroboros, you're not necessarily locking them away, but the idea is basically you are putting up some of your own money to say that you have some skin in the game and that anything that you say is actually true. So, whereas proof of work, you use a computational power to actually prove that. In proof of stake, you're actually staking your own tokens to basically say that.
And one other follow-up. So do you have your own wallet, or are you going to use the Cardano wallet?
Yes, we're creating our own wallet.
Related question: Are you creating your own blockchain, or did you? I mean, I know you're creating your own chain, but did you fork an existing code base, or is this brand new?
Good question. So IOHK, before they created Cardano, created a framework called Scorex. It's written in Scala, and we're building on top of that. So basically, they built just enough to create a modular way to create a basic token, and we're building everything on top of that. Yes?
How are you sourcing more projects?
So right now, we have a great guy named Kamanzi going around Africa right now, trying to find projects on the ground. He's working closely with a lot of people that he knows in Rwanda. So for the beginning, yes, we are going around and physically finding these investments to source. The UN and the World Bank are also helping us to find more investments. Yes, in the back.
So do you have an example of what you've accomplished so far?
So right now, yeah, we are working with an initiative in Colombia. So right now we are helping them build smart contracts using our system. We have a test net that's been running since last July. We are currently working with a Indian group. I don't know if y'all have heard the news right now in Kerala. It's currently being flooded, but they were building a farming co-op there to basically source, what's the word I'm looking for? To basically source I forget what it's called. Source organic, that's the word I was looking for. Source organic crops in India. We wrote out the contracts. We were working with the Dutch bank, Rabobank, for key management, so that way they help the farmers to actually hold their keys and hold their assets and transport it to the Netherlands to create chocolate. They're growing cacao in India, transporting it to Switzerland and the Netherlands to create organically sourced chocolates to create to sell in the Netherlands. So that's what was happening there. But unfortunately, Kerala is underwater right now, so they're having more issues that we are helping them try to get through right now. Yes?
So as an investor, what's kind of the deal structure? Is there a standard, or is it varying by each project, or is there?
Yeah, it varies by project. Right now, we're trying to work on the standardization process since each new use case is kind of unique, but we're working to get towards a more standard process that people can work through.
Who's your third party's auditing for your smart contracts?
Right now, we're working with Solidified.io. They just ran an audit on us, actually. They're about to open it up to a public bounty.
One more question. Yeah,
okay.
I think that's great.
I was probably writing, but who's writing the smart contract? You or the?
So right now, we're helping people write smart contracts just on our test net and to get things started. But afterwards, we're going to basically create a few templates that people can use to make things easier. But other than that, it's open to anybody to write smart contracts on our system.
Is that a thing you're hiring for?
Actually, yes, we are hiring right now. We are about to start our hiring process. All right.
Yeah, that's great. And Nick is based here at Capital Factory, so
Yes.
he is in Austin and he works out of this office, so they'll be expanding the team here. So thank
Yeah.
you. I'll take that.
I have the whistle back, but I'm gonna give it to Doug and Shayna. No worries, gravity's working perfect. So let me get you all set up, just give me 1 second. Doug, if you wanna come up, are you going first or
Yes.
Shayna? Doug is, I'll hand you the microphone, I'll get the laptop set up for you.
You need some more vodka.
Little humor at 7 o'clock at night.
I'm gonna put this right here. If that's okay. Do you want the magic wand or do you? I'll take the wand. Let me get you set up real quick.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Doug Jones. I'm a partner of McInnes Lockridge here in Austin. I'm a tax attorney, and I'll talk to you about the tax implications of cryptocurrency. And I'm going to try my best to make it more interesting than it sounds. We're going to cover a lot of stuff very high level and very conceptually. So we have a small enough room here that if you have a question, go ahead and put your hand up to see if we can't take care of those as we're going through these slides. So I'll just go ahead and get started while we're getting this worked out. There aren't a lot of answers when it comes to what are the tax implications of cryptocurrencies. The IRS hasn't given us a lot of guidance. The one piece that we do have,
Is this where you want to be?
this is it. This is
All right.
it.
Down takes you to the next slide and B makes it black over there to the right.
Okay, fantastic.
For a second. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. So this notice up here came out in 2014, and it covered what the IRS called convertible virtual currencies. And the important thing that it told us was that these convertible virtual currencies, cryptocurrencies, they're not currencies for tax purposes. There's an entire regime of rules dealing with how you treat foreign currencies when you're using them to do various things. Those rules don't apply. What the IRS told us in this notice is that virtual currencies are property for tax purposes. And that has a number of implications that we're going to go through as we go through this. One thing that it means is that if you perform services or you receive virtual currency in exchange for goods, that the income that is generated by that is going to be the fair market value of the cryptocurrency at the time you receive it. It's going to be subject, if you're performing, if you have an employee performing services for you and you're paying them in Bitcoin or something, or some other token, that transfer of services for cryptocurrency is subject to information backup reporting, payroll, tax obligations, just like if you're paying them in fiat currency. Miners who are mining virtual currencies have to include the fair market value of the cryptocurrency when they receive it. And importantly, if you exchange your cryptocurrency for something else, like a cup of coffee or a car or what have you, that's a taxable exchange. You've got a basis in your cryptocurrency, so when you received it, your tax basis is the value at the time you received it. And if it appreciated in cost, and then you exchanged it for something, that gain between your basis and the fair market value is taxable income because of that exchange. So that notice is really the only guidance that we have from the IRS. Various professional organizations have put out suggested guidance that they would like to see. The American Institute of CPAs did something like this in May of this year. And one of the things they talk about is that when you are in a mining situation, they point out that the tax effects of mining cryptocurrency is very similar to if you're providing services to someone, rather than, for example, producing property, like if you're actually mining ore out of the ground or something like that. So they say, well, okay, so if you're telling us, the IRS, you're telling us that mining is like providing a service as far as income is concerned, You should also tell us that mining is like a service as far as our costs are concerned. So if you're providing a service, the costs that you have are currently deductible, everything except equipment. However, if you are in a production property model, those costs instead are capitalized and they come into the basis of the property you're producing. So the AI CPA said, we'd like you, the IRS, to tell us, how to treat our costs, and this would be consistent with how you're treating the income side of it. They offer some ways to determine fair market value. The price fluctuates a lot, so if mining means that the fair market value is income at the time you receive it, well, when is that? Is it to the minute? Is it close of business? What exchange do you look at? There isn't a lot of guidance on that particular issue. We do have a question here.
Yeah, I have a question on the mining. So, I mean, if you look at some of these ASIC miners, I might have a Bitcoin miner like an S1 or an S9, and it's good for a year. So, I mean, I'm just going to expense that. If I buy graphics cards, these graphics cards are they could collapse in prices. They're only good for a year, maybe a year and a half, 2 years.
So the only difference between the capitalization and the current deduction would be is if your equipment, the life of the equipment went on beyond one taxable year in that situation. Another question?
I actually want to go back to the first slide you showed regarding the currency, treating them like a currency or so yeah, here considered foreign currency. So my question is, you must have heard about the petrocurrencies in Venezuela, right? They just launched it today. So now a foreign government using it like a currency, will I get double taxed if I do business in that country? That there are laws against, for helping with the double taxation of two countries if I'm doing business there as an American citizen. Now that country using cryptocurrency as a currency of its own, and I pay tax with that cryptocurrency, what my situation would be according to this?
That's a great question. I actually don't know a ton about that particular, the petrocurrency, but it might, and we don't have, if it is sort of a convertible virtual currency, the only guidance we have is this guidance. So it's not a foreign currency for US tax purposes, absent the IRS telling you that it is.
Can you go back to the next slide? You said you could write off everything, including electricity costs, but you cannot write off your capital equipment?
Correct. And so this is an open question. If you are under the theory that as a miner you are providing a service, then you would take the position consistent with that your costs other than your hard equipment are currently deductible. If you're under the theory that actually, I think I'm actually more like producing, which you probably wouldn't want to take that position, then it would be capitalizable into the basis of your assets.
So what if you're mining at a loss? Like, let's say you've purchased equipment for $10,000, right? You have a bunch of ASICs, and now your electricity costs you $3,000 in a year, and you have $5,000 in income that you've generated. Can you not take that loss on the equipment?
I don't think I follow.
But all right, you buy the equipment, right? Now you're mining. You're mining at a loss, but it's a sunk cost. You already have the equipment, so you're not going to not mine.
Right. So then you're not going to be showing a profit on your return.
Correct.
And then you'll have, so you won't be paying a tax on your loss, I don't think.
Can you write it off?
Can you write off your equipment costs?
Well, you would take them as, that would be your depreciation deduction. That's how you'd be doing that.
But
so if they only have
it's basically worthless already. Your equipment's basically worthless if you're mining underwater, right? You bought $10,000 worth of equipment, and it's only generating $5,000.
Yeah.
And you're already underwater.
Right. But have you appreciated the costs of your equipment already?
20 years.
No.
Let's
we'll talk later.
Yeah, we'll talk after I don't want to get too bogged down before we get into the slides. Okay, so next topic we're going to talk about is the enforcement efforts of the IRS. So it's a big issue. You can see over the 2013 to 2015 period, 14,000 Coinbase users bought, sold, received $20,000 or more of Bitcoin, and that's just Bitcoin. Over the same period, only 800 to 900 taxpayers reported gains. So there's a lot of non-compliance going on out there. And the IRS is very keen, and the Justice Department is very keen on sort of rectifying this. So starting back in November of 2016, the Department of Justice went after Coinbase with the John Doe summons, which is just what you call it when you go after information of someone and you don't know the identity of the person you're going after. So it's a John Doe summons. Over a period of years, the scope of this summons has shrunk. It started out extremely broad, now it's a little bit narrower, but still pretty broad. And in February of this year, Coinbase notified 13,000 customers that it would be providing their information to the IRS. Now, in some of the conferences that IRS officials speak at, I've heard some of them say that they don't anticipate a sort of specific voluntary compliance program. So for some types of non-compliance, foreign bank accounts, for example, is one area like this. The IRS will say, hey, if you're not in compliance, come forward, tell us about it, and we'll make it worth your while in some way, whether we're going to waive penalties or reduce the amount of tax you have to pay, that kind of thing. They've indicated they don't anticipate a specific voluntary compliance program aimed at cryptocurrency compliance. But there are some general sort of things that people can do that aren't in compliance. Generally, it's just a better idea to get out ahead of it before you get a letter from the IRS. You can get ahead of penalties. In extremely, egregious cases, you can get ahead of criminal. It can be a crime. You can get ahead of criminal implications.
Did Coinbase send out a statement to these clients at the end of the year saying this was your gain or loss? Do you know if they did?
Yes, so most of the exchanges will have some feature on them where they will show you your, what gains or losses your transactions will have generated. But it's for people with a lot of transactions, from what I understand, it's not the best tool for them.
I think you have one more question, right here on the left.
Oh, sorry.
No more, yes.
Does the IRS have the resources to go after even anywhere near close to 13,000 people?
So no is the short answer to that question. But what they'll do is go after the bigger acts of non-compliance first, and then sort of probably work down. So if you think about tax returns and how many errors and fibs and flubs there are of all the tax returns in America, there's a lot, and most of them don't get audited. So a similar kind of thing would apply, but it could happen to anyone. Even if you're a small investor, you could, they could audit your account. So next topic I want to talk about are 1031 like-kind exchanges. So in 2018 going forward, thanks to the new, the 2017 Tax Reform Act, which became effective in 2018, we now know that like-kind exchanges can only be done on real property. So you can't, in 2018 going forward, you can't do a like-kind exchange. We know for certain that you can't do a like-kind exchange with cryptocurrencies. We do not know for certain what happens before 2018. Before 2018, you could do like-kind exchanges on any kind of assets, so long as the assets that one asset that you're exchanging for the other were of like-kind to each other. It's a big question whether or not cryptocurrencies qualify for this treatment. The general rule, if you're exchanging property, is that it's taxable. It doesn't matter what kind of property it is. If you exchange one thing for another, you've got to recognize your gain or loss. So what we lawyers do when we are faced with a question that we don't have an answer to is we look to analogous authorities. And there's a couple interesting analogous authorities as far as like-kind exchanges are concerned. The first one is a revenue ruling from 1976. And it looked at like-kind exchanges of bullion. So bullion is precious coin or bar, and the value is solely derived from the quantity and purity of the precious metal. It doesn't matter how old it is, or what country it's from, or what conditions it's in. And the 1976 revenue ruling said that you can exchange the bullion of one country for the bullion of another, and it can qualify as a like-kind exchange, because those two kinds of property are of like kind to each other. And they reasoned that you can do this because their values are derived in the same way. Now, a couple years later, in 1979, there was a ruling on the exchanges of bullion for a numismatic coin. Numismatic coin are what coin collectors collect. They can be gold coins, just like bullion, but their value is not derived only from the quantity and purity of the metal, but also the condition, how old it is, market demand, that kind of thing. And that ruling said that those bullion and numismatic coins are not of like kind to each other. And the reasoning behind that was because they were valued differently. You reach the value of bullion and the numismatic type coin differently. So, knowing that we have these rulings out here dealing with 1031s of these sorts of assets, what about a swap of Bitcoin and Ether or something like that? It's an open question. There aren't any court cases or IRS rulings that tell you how to treat it one way or another. If you held a gun to my head and asked and forced me to make a prediction, I would say they're probably not of like kind. I mean, the values of things like Bitcoin and Ether fluctuate independently of one another. They're based on different technologies, different communities of users. It seems like there's some differences. Actually, I'm going to finish up my point and then I'll come back to you. But that's actually not the biggest problem, in my guess, with respect to getting a like-kind exchange done with cryptocurrencies. And that's because it's not easy to do a 1031 exchange. There's hoops that you have to jump through in order to get it done right. In the simplest example, if I wanted to swap my house for my neighbor's house, we could just swap deeds and that would be fine. I've exchanged my house for another house. It's an exchange of real estate for real estate. That's not how most people do 1031 exchanges. Most people sell their house and then go buy a new one and they want it to qualify as a like-kind exchange. And the only way that works is by using what's called a qualified intermediary. So if I just sell my house, I'm exchanging my house for money. It's taxable. To use a qualified intermediary, what I have to do is I have to sell my house, make it so that the person who's buying it writes the check to the qualified intermediary, then they go out and buy the replacement house and send me the deed. The cash never touched my hands, it's not in my account, it's an exchange of real estate for real estate. So, how many people are out there who thought, hey, I'm gonna get onto Coinbase and I'm just gonna sell Bitcoin and buy Ether and thought to myself, and they thought to themselves, I don't have to worry about taxes, that was a like-kind exchange. Well, not unless they did something to make sure that they weren't actually receiving cash and then reinvesting back in some kind of asset. I understand that some of the exchanges have features where they say you can do a direct exchange, but to be completely honest, I don't know enough about those features to know exactly how they work and whether they would qualify as sort of a qualified intermediary type exchange. So it's an open question, but only with respect to prior to 2018.
So you like where I was going in terms of real estate. I've got friends here in Texas that swap large tracts of land doing like-kind exchanges for their own reasons. And so that makes a lot of sense. It's difficult though with tokenized currencies because part of it's treated like a good, like it's a piece of land or like it's a piece of equipment, and then part of it is like money.
Yeah.
So it makes it very different.
So when you do a crypto to crypto, what happens in that instance if you're not going to fiat?
It depends on how you've done it. If you've just sold it on an exchange and then bought a different kind, that probably doesn't qualify. If you're using one of these features where they say, well, this is a direct exchange where we're actually going to take it directly from your wallet and exchange it directly with someone else's wallet, no fiat currency involved, no conversion into fiat currency or anything like that, maybe. That's you got a better shot. But if it's just a straight up, I want to sell it and buy it on an exchange, I'd be very skeptical that that would qualify.
So, here's the tokenization question comes to mind, because the tokenization will make different kind of assets actually like-kinded, based on that token being the same. So I can do a like-kind exchange with that token, although those tokens are actually coming from two different assets, different kind of assets. Let's say you have a house, I have a car, and I tokenize my asset, house, and you tokenize your car, and now I'm giving half of my tokens to you. Would that make it like-kind exchange?
If someone tells us that different types of current cryptocurrencies or tokens, those classes of assets can be considered like-kind to each other, perhaps. But we don't have any case or statute saying that those or guidance from the IRS.
Based on your experience, when do you think that as like an investor or an entrepreneur, I should wait until these things are going to be clarified? Is there a time frame that usually takes for the legislators to catch up with these things?
Frustrating
They're
and
not
long
going to retroactively destroy you.
the time frame. Yeah. No. So I actually there are rumors that there is more guidance to come potentially this year, and this has been things that IRS officials have said in the news. If you read the tax news, but that's you can't bank on that.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't recall exactly, but with 1031 exchanges, you have like 45 days to identify a property and 180 days to close on the second property, correct?
So that's the qualified intermediary rules that you're talking about. Yeah, that's right.
So that doesn't really make sense with.
Sorry, go ahead.
Never mind. I'm just thinking out loud.
Question over here.
What about coins that you mount yourself to exchange for another one? In this case, I would be thinking of something like Sweatcoin, where it's based on your physical activity. So you create it while you're exercising, you're doing something out, and then I want to exchange it for the currency gets used digital now. And I could see lots of people getting together to create and aggregate a lot of these coins for an exchange. So what do you think is the type of perspective for me when you do a lot of little micro coinage and aggregate it to get an interest in a larger cryptocurrency?
I think as the only difference between a small number of transactions and a large number is just the amount of gain. It's not going to make a difference if it's a small number of exchanges that you're doing or a lot.
So
the same rules apply.
Your currency was created by your steps. How do they calculate? I'm not asking for an answer, but would they go through and determine that these many steps, is this much money, or
And well, so you're coming right back to the same question where whatever it is that's generating a certain kind of token, steps, mining, foraging, what have you, if you're turning it into something else, you've got the issue. It's the same issue. So I'm going to move on to the next topic, which may be the last depending on our timing. Bitcoin forks, which are very interesting when you're trying to think about the tax implications of cryptocurrency or any kind of cryptocurrency fork. You all know how this works. You have a Bitcoin in your account, a fork happens. On Monday you've got a Bitcoin, on Tuesday you've got a Bitcoin and a Bitcoin Cash. How do you report that in your tax return? Again, we don't know exactly what the answer is, but we have some analogous authorities that we can look to. One is a stock dividend. With a stock dividend, you would have one share of Dell on Monday. If they do a split, you got 2 shares on Tuesday. But that's not a great analogy because the value of the 1 share on Monday is exactly the same as the value of the 2 shares you have on Tuesday. With the Bitcoin fork, that's not the case. The value of Bitcoin you have on Monday is less than the value of the Bitcoin and the Bitcoin Cash that you have on Tuesday. So the stock split's not great. There's actually a revenue ruling from 1986 that deals with buying pregnant cows, which actually is kind of applicable here, surprisingly. In that revenue ruling, someone bought a cow and they knew it was pregnant. The cow gave birth. Revenue ruling deals with, okay, well, how do you report this? What are the tax implications of this? And what they say is, when the calf is born, you split your basis between the cow and the calf. So on Monday, you had a pregnant cow with a basis of $100, whatever you pick. Tuesday, it gives birth. You have a cow with a basis of 50 and a calf with a basis of 50. And that's important because that's saying that the date of the birth is not an income event. You have an asset with a new basis, but you don't have gain. You're not going to have gain with the calf until you sell it. So if this type of thinking applies to Bitcoin forks, you wouldn't have gain on the new coin or token that you have until you sell it. But it's not the only thing that could apply. There's also a doctrine of law dealing with general windfalls.
So sorry, you're saying that because the basis was split, that when you, so like let's say post fork you sell all of your Bitcoin Cash, you're saying that for purposes like if you invested $100, your capital gains then are based on that your original investment was $50?
When you sold, that's right. So if in the Bitcoin fork situation, if we're applying the pregnant cow law, when you sold either your Bitcoin or your Bitcoin Cash, and each had half the basis of your original Bitcoin, then you would have, so $100 original basis of Bitcoin, after the fork, 50-50, and you sold it for $200.
But this is like bizarre because like there's so many forks. So like if there are like let's say you invested $100,000 and then there are 4 forks, and then you sell I don't know a Bitcoin for like a small return, but all of a sudden your basis is cut in 4, so your capital gains is $75,000.
Yeah.
Wow, that's messed up.
But you don't have to pay tax currently. You can defer the tax.
And what happens to the fork when the value of that, say like the coin diamond, is so much less? Let's say you split it just to half, 50-50, but the diamond's worth way less than
There's
half.
probably a way to allocate between that's not just splitting it in half.
Yeah.
Probably do some sort of math, and I am not going to hazard to guess how you would do that exactly, but if you're going to take this position on your return now for years in which forks have happened, what you want to do is figure out something that's reasonable and you want to apply it consistently, even though we don't know exactly how you would be allocating the basis. If you're going to apply, this sort of thinking. The other, I'll come back to you in a second. The other sort of modality that you can analyze this under is general windfalls. This would be finding money or catching a home run ball at a baseball game. And in general windfall situation, income is realized when there's an undeniable accession to wealth, clear realization, and complete dominion and control over the property. So when you catch that ball, whatever it's worth is under the general windfall sort of analysis. So if that applies, then when the fork happens, it's taxable income, whatever the value of the new coin is.
And so some of the forks you don't get, right? Because if it's on an exchange, that exchange might or might not give it to you. A different exchange might give it to you. And if it's in your own wallet, then you have to do the work yourself, and you could end up losing all your Bitcoin for some fraud fork.
I would be very surprised if the answer that eventually we got was that you have to pay tax on the coin that you didn't get before.
Right. Right, because there's a lot of fake Bitcoins out there that are pretenders, right? So you would never split it for like super Bitcoin, because that's a fraud. And there was like 10 of them last year that were frauds in December and January. So you would never split them.
Guys, be mindful too that Doug's looking at this purely from the legal perspective, not the technical perspective, which is what some of that framing is. So I think it's good framing, but let's be mindful of Shayna's time and Doug's time when we're thinking about these questions. So.
I've got one major question on atomic swaps. Is there a reason why you're not using currency exchange as a guideline to Ethereum to Bitcoin? To me,
Yeah, you can't do a like-kind exchange with currencies.
But it's an exchange of currencies.
Correct, but it wouldn't be a tax-free one.
Right, that's why I'm saying I think it should be tax-free. If I could change US dollars.
Write your numbers.
Write your congressman. Yeah, that's right. That's the legal answer. Yeah. Any other? You want to keep moving, Doug? You feel
Yeah,
like you need to get
I'm
caught
gonna.
up?
I think maybe we could do another. Well, I want to really quickly cover compensating employees with tokens. So none of you are going to be able to read this, but if they're when we finish up here, I'm going to put up a slide that has a bit.ly link where you can download this this presentation.
Oh, dude, way to go! Thank you for that. I didn't know you were going to do that. I wasn't passing it around, so.
So remind me to do that before we finish up. But really quickly, I'm going to run through some of the consequences of compensating employees with tokens. And since we know that cryptocurrency is property for tax purposes, we actually know a lot about how compensating employees with property works. So it's going to be very, very similar to compensating employees with stock. One way to do it would be just give them tokens, unrestricted. That's going to be fair market value of the tokens at the time you receive it. It's going to be income. Payroll taxes are due, information reporting, all that kind of stuff is going to have to be just like if you're paying with cash. Yeah.
So it's reported as income at the time of receipt, not as time of sale, right?
Correct.
I'm having an argument with some people, several people.
When you're paying your employees, that's right. Now you could also make these, I'm not just going to blaze through this because we're running out of time, or you can also put vesting restrictions on the granted tokens. So cliff vests a third every year or something like that. In that situation, the general rule is that the tax is due when the vesting happens. So one-third, one-third, one-third in each of 3 years. You can make what's called an 83B election, which I'm sure everyone has at least heard of before, which is what you do with restricted stock. The exact same thing you could do with restricted token grants. And in that situation, it's all taxable in the year of grant. You're saying tax me now rather than tax me later because I think it's going to be worth more later. So if you think it's going to appreciate, your best bet is to make your 83B election. You can do options on tokens, just like you can do options on stock, where it's a right to buy a certain amount of token at a certain price for a certain amount of time. That's not taxable when it's granted, but when you exercise it, the difference between what it costs and what you paid for it is income to the employee. Again, payroll, information, reporting back and withholding, all that applies.
Hey Doug, on an option scenario, that would still be registered, like in the company, I'm a CEO, work with my CFO, I've done some of these options, I still have to carry that as a liability to my employee at some point. If I try to option, you have to be.
And you're going to get a deduction when they exercise it.
Right.
Spread is going to be the deduction for the company.
Okay.
Watch out for 409A. I'm not even going to talk about 409A. If you're doing token options, watch out for it. There are exceptions for stock that apply under 409A. They do not apply to tokens because the statute says stock options. So watch out for 409A. That's all I'll turn this over to Shannon now, unless there are any other burning questions that I can.
Anything from the DOL on qualified accounts with respect to cryptocurrency?
Department of Labor? With respect to what?
I don't know, I mean, they tend to have an opinion on everything, so I don't know if there's anything from them.
I'm not aware of what the Labor Department is if they've gotten as far as this. If you're taking the theory that whatever applies to property applies to compensation with token, then I think that would be where you start. If there was a rule with respect to the property like stock, it's probably going to apply. One more and then we'll turn it over.
Can we do 83C on founder tokens, essentially, very similar to founder shares or units?
83B?
Is it B? It's
yeah.
B.
So on, if they are, only if they're subject to vesting. The only thing the 83B election is going to get you is it's going to move up the taxable event in time. So rather than being taxed when it vests in the future, when it's worth more, you get taxed at grant on everything. So
which
if
is
you're
usually like
typically your founder shares aren't going to be subject to vesting. Or if they are, yes, you can make your 83B election. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. there's more questions. I'll be around after. You can have some time. Thank you.
It is. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Good luck. Be nice.
There we go.
Yeah, remember, we're not the technical experts here. We're just the legal experts. You're going to see some.
Yeah, hit that.
Speaking of not being a technical
Yeah, don't worry.
expert.
She doesn't like turn to black. And then we go, down. They make me nervous too, and I know half of them.
So you're going to hear some common themes with Doug's presentation. Here, lots of gray areas. The law moves much, much faster than technology. You couldn't have guessed that. And what regulators like to do is try and fit new things into existing legal frameworks. So it's a lot of the same pregnant cow kind of analogies and looking back at a bunch of old court cases to try and make sense of all this. So we're going to do some kind of basic overview first, talk a little bit about ICO approaches, SEC guidance in this area. There's been a lot of movement in the last couple of months. Why utility tokens are probably not the answer to avoiding securities regulation, and then placing ICOs in the traditional securities framework. So I probably don't have to tell anybody in this room what an ICO is, so I'll just kind of skip over that part. And a lot of you probably know that the reason why people find these attractive is that you're not really giving equity. The tokens aren't actual ownership in the company. There are some more traditional types of offerings where you're really investing in a fund that then invests in cryptocurrencies. But either way, the SEC has taken the position that these are securities offerings. So this is a really complex regulatory framework. Doug talked about the IRS's regulation of cryptocurrencies. The CFTC Commodity Futures Trading Commission has also gotten involved. They see cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin as being commodities. And then of course the SEC, which has gotten involved in regulating ICOs, and some states are getting involved in this area as well. We'll talk a little bit about a new law in Wyoming. So what makes the SEC think they can regulate ICOs or cryptocurrencies? And this just goes back to what's a security. So federal securities laws, there's a definition of a security that's like a page and a half long that lists a bunch of different things. And one of the things in that list is an investment contract. So what's an investment contract? And the SEC defines an investment contract based on the tests set forth in a 1940s Supreme Court case called Howey. And there are 4 prongs: an investment of money into a common enterprise with the expectation of profits based solely or primarily on the efforts of others. So the managerial or entrepreneurial efforts of other people, not you. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds with this case, but I think it's illustrative. It was about buying pieces of land in a Florida orange grove, and they were actually deeded pieces of land. So an investor bought an actual piece of property and got a deed to it. But then they would lease back the property to this other company that would actually manage it and grow the oranges, and then they would get profits from it. And so the people running this enterprise said, well, I'm not selling a security, I'm selling land. And land sales are not subject to SEC registration requirements. But the SEC and the court really looked past that and said, well, who's buying this land? These are people coming to a sales presentation at a Florida resort. They're not farmers. They never actually set foot on the property. They're not really doing anything. So they're really just buying this and leasing it back to make money off of the sales of the oranges, and they're not doing anything to actually make that money. That's an investment contract, that's a security, and it's subject to federal securities laws. So as a primary rule, all securities must be registered with the SEC and with state regulatory authorities unless that sale fits an exemption. And so there's a huge landscape of different exemptions. It's based on lots of different factors. So who's selling the security, who's buying them, the characteristics of the offering, and the exemptions can really vary widely. But it's important to remember that you have to comply with both federal and state securities laws. So it's just kind of a simple overview. The most basic kind of securities exemption is a purely intrastate offering. So I'm selling securities in Texas. I'm based in Texas, everyone that I'm offering to, everyone that I'm selling to lives in Texas. That would be a classic intrastate offering, kind of like a friends and family raise. However, from a federal perspective, this exemption is incredibly narrow that you almost would never want to try and rely on it, especially with things like ICOs, because if you're using the internet, that could be using the means of interstate commerce, which means the federal government could get involved in regulating that offering. So no specific requirements for the offering or information provided, but again, this is a very narrow exemption. So some moderate exemptions, you don't meet the intrastate offering exemption requirements, but you're selling only to accredited investors, and I'm sure you've all heard that term. Defined in federal securities laws, people have to meet certain income or net worth requirements to be considered an accredited investor. I'm sure a lot of you have heard Reg D. A lot of these most common exemptions fall under Regulation D, particularly Rule 504 and 506. Under Rule 504, you can raise $5 million. Under 506, it's unlimited, but there are various requirements about whether you can make general solicitations or advertisements, whether you can sell only to accredited investors or a certain limited number of unaccredited investors. This gets a little bit complicated, but essentially you don't really have to, it's just a notice filing with the SEC. File a Form D, you can do it online. Actually, there isn't a filing fee. I apologize, that slide is wrong. And then most states have companion Form D filings that you make, and most states really do want a fee. But it's pretty basic. You fill that out before you make any offerings, and then you can go ahead and do your offering. Did somebody have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak to the those ICOs which are blocking people in the United States, even the ones which are based in the United States. Does the SEC, there's no, to my knowledge, there's never been anything that's been said about that specific topic?
I haven't read anything about that. I think, and I'll get to this after kind of been done with the basics, but kind of the one area where the SEC has declined to get involved are things that are done overseas, but that's normally when you have an ICO offering that's like based in Switzerland, for example,
sure.
And they're not selling to people in the US. I'm not sure about those where if the company is based here and they're selling to people abroad, that could still bump up against SEC regulations, but I'm not sure. I haven't read anything on that in particular.
Okay.
So the more difficult exemption categories, which are still under Reg D, but you're selling to non-accredited investors as well. Here it's more expensive. You have to provide certain information that's more like an offering memorandum or a prospectus. It still doesn't involve direct SEC review, but it gets more complicated and more expensive if you're selling to non-accredited investors. Then there's this new regulation that fell under the Jobs Act called Regulation A+, which comes out of Reg A. This is kind of like a mini IPO process, so it doesn't go all the way to a full IPO. You can raise, there are two tiers, either 20 million or 50 million. But the big benefit of this is you can do public solicitation to non-accredited investors, and the securities are not restricted for resale once they're sold. So this is a huge benefit for startups, but it is still expensive. You do have to file with the SEC. There's an expedited kind of fast track review process, but it is much more like an IPO.
How many investors are you limited to in the Reg A and the Reg A+?
You're not limited to investors under Reg A+. It's an unlimited number of investors.
And Reg A, also, you're not limited? You don't have to become a public reporting company if you go over 2,000?
Well, there's for certain issuers, there are ongoing reporting requirements, but it's not the same as becoming kind of a traditional public company. Does that make sense?
Where would you be traded if you did that?
You can trade on the New York Stock Exchange under Reg A+. It's just you don't rise to the same level as like an IBM under federal securities laws. I'm sorry?
Are you over the counter or?
You can trade on various stock exchanges. This is just the SEC filing and requirements of what information needs to be delivered to investors.
From experience, Frank, not to speak in your stead, but based on, so PouchPoints looked into a lot of this for a number of reasons, and that's why we're working with McGinnis because of what you're hearing from everybody. But what we've learned is that when you do the Reg A+, that's precisely where you go, is you can register then for a filing fee to be listed on OTC. We had some discussions about, hey, we don't want to list on OTC, we just want to sell the token openly. The framing that we got, and it wasn't from Magnus Lockridge, but it was from a different party regarding that, is that the fee to be able to do that was relatively low, and it'd be silly to avoid that existing investment pool for the lower fee from an OTC standpoint. So again, I don't want to overshadow what Shayna's saying, but that's been our experience when we looked into some of the regulatory issues around, establishing the token up front. So we could talk more about that offline if anybody's interested. David, do you have a question?
This might be a silly question, I don't know, but some of the guidance that I saw online said, specific to Reg 8 Plus, because a couple laws written probably, says Reg 8 Plus can be used for stocks and bonds. Can we use it for a token that is not an equity?
Yes, so that's kind of the underlying message, is this is just overall securities laws, and coins in an ICO are considered securities by the SEC. So just as if you were a company just wanting to sell equity, it's really the same thing in the SEC's eyes.
Okay, so it doesn't matter if there's no equity interest?
No, what I'm talking about is not at all specific to ICOs, to coins, to crypto. This is just general federal securities laws. And kind of the underlying message, so you're leading me, thank you very much, great question, because you're leading me right into it, is basically the SEC has decided that they're going to regulate ICOs just like they would regulate the issuance of debt or equity securities, selling stock. So I'm sure everyone's seen ICOs are exploding, they're all over the place, and a lot of people are doing this wrong. So I think someone asked this question in the IRS context earlier. Well, they can't come after everybody, right? Well, I wouldn't want to rely on that. The SEC has really made it clear that they're taking this seriously. This is just kind of a list of a few things that have happened over the last year or two. I'll get into some of this more in a bit, but especially very recently, over the last couple of months, since April, there have been a few really huge fraud cases. This is an area that's rife with fraud. You're basically seeing Ponzi schemes out there, and they're getting these companies and the founders on failure to register, as well as just straightforward securities fraud. So you're seeing cases where people are stopped boarding planes trying to get out of the United States because they took $35 million from investors fraudulently. So once you start seeing that, the SEC is really going to get even more involved. A few other things, though, over the last couple of months. The SEC chairman, when he was testifying before a House committee back in April, made a statement essentially saying that Bitcoin is not a security. And other SEC directors have made similar statements over the last couple of months. Really, this is, again, so federal regulators are going to look and say, well, what is this like? And we've heard that, well, cryptocurrency from the IRS's perspective is property. You've heard me say it's a security. Well, if you get to the level of Bitcoin and Ether, where it's really so decentralized, think back to the Howey test. Are you really relying on the entrepreneurial or managerial efforts of like a core group of a third party, like you would be, a C-suite officers of a company that are getting that company up and running and are making your stock worth more? At that point, no. The SEC has said that's a commodity. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission is going to be in charge of regulating that. That's more like a currency like the US dollar. So we're not going to regulate that as we would a security.
So you're saying the Howey test, the status changes over time if the...
It is not a bright line rule. It is fact specific, facts and circumstances. It's a huge gray area. So right now, this is not a law. It's not a regulation saying Bitcoin is okay. It's SEC officials just making the statement in testimony or to the press. But that shows you kind of how they're viewing this. But we've got Bitcoin and Ether on the one hand, and everything else on the other hand, and anything in between, we just don't know. So you really have to think through the prongs of the Howey test.
Can you talk about howeycoins.com?
Yeah, so thank you. So again, howeycoins.com, named after the Howey test, was a website that the SEC launched back in May. It's basically a fake website that is used, I should have put a link to it here. It's kind of used to illustrate how easily people are being taken in by scams, paid celebrity endorsements on social media, getting people to buy coins. The SEC is very concerned about this, and this is obviously, kind of a novel way to approach it, but the SEC's mandate is investor protection, and so they're clearly very worried about all of these ICOs popping up and people paying money for something that's not really going to be worth anything. So.
Would that be qualified also under these crowdfunding laws? I think you can raise up to $1 million with a certain number of funds accredited investors, something like that.
That falls under just the same regulatory framework. So what I talked about with Reg D and Rule 504 and 506, a lot of that came under the Jobs Act in 2012, and the regs were finalized in 2015. Reg A Plus came out of that as well. It was a way to kind of make fundraising easier for startups and smaller companies, but it's all now kind of merged into the same regulatory framework. So they redid a lot of the numbers on the regulations, but.
So Shayna, as part of the work that we've done with McGinnis and Lockridge, I'm happy to share a little bit of this with the blockchain community, is that we look at Reg CF as sort of like the minimum sort of like basic non-accredited investor opportunity up to $1 million. But there are some pitfalls with that. So be sure you're talking to people about what it really means if you do CF and you don't get $1 million. What are your long-term commitments from a financial reporting perspective? The Reg A Plus is a little bit more advantaged, but still comes with similar consequences. If you don't get 20 million, you get 1 million, what are your longer term sort of obligations from a reporting perspective? So I'm just kind of sharing some experience from a business owner's perspective.
It really is a whole landscape of exemptions. I mean, very few people are actually going to register a sale or offering of securities with the SEC. That's an IPO. That is incredibly expensive in time and legal fees. No, most people are not going to do that. Most companies are not going to do that. So it's all about fitting your offering into an exemption. And it's a huge landscape. Your offering could possibly fit in lots of different boxes. So it really is a question of looking and seeing what are the requirements, what are the implications if I'm falling under this particular reg or that particular rule. And then if I am saying I'm exempt because of X reg or X rule, you got to make sure you follow all the rules under that particular box.
What's the cost of getting that kind of advice from a law firm like yours? Like, what would be the cost of getting that kind of, okay, where do we fit in one of those boxes?
We charge by the hour. I can't give you, it completely depends on particular circumstances. And then of course if there are filings involved, drafting and offering memorandum, that's where it gets more
finding that
expensive.
box, you cannot anticipate that.
It just depends on the circumstances. I mean, kind of what, and again, you'll all have access to these slides. I tried to simplify it by kind of putting it into the simple, the intermediary, and then the more complex filings, and then the beyond notice filings. Each box kind of gets more and more expensive and more complicated.
What was the last bullet on your previous slide? I think you kind of skipped over it.
Oh, sorry.
About a company having a sudden had a blockchain business.
So this was actually, they got a couple of lawyers in this one, and it was, I believe the lawyers had been issued coins in an offering, and those coins were restricted. They're restricted securities, and the value of the company shot up because they developed a blockchain business, and so the value shot up overnight. And in late December, early January of this year, these lawyers decided to sell because now the value was up even though they were restricted, and the SEC does not like that, so went after these guys. Okay, so the SEC has published guidance on, from an investor perspective, on what questions should I ask before investing in an ICO. So the same kinds of questions that you want to ask before investing in a company. Some other specific things: root out a Ponzi scheme. Is my money going to be used to cash out others? What specific rights come with my investment? Does this company have financial statements? Are they audited? Is there trading data? Is there some way to verify it? Who are the founders? What is their bio? Do I trust these people? Do they have experience in this area? Can I sell my investment? Is it restricted? Another big issue, obviously, not just fraud, but a hack or malware. What happens? There are a few cases that the SEC has investigated where a company did an ICO, then they had a hack, and all of the value disappeared overnight. So what's the liability there? One big case in last December, Munchie, is kind of the big case so far, the big enforcement action that really shows that a utility token is not going to get you around securities regulation requirements. So again, I'm sure I don't have to tell anybody in this room what a utility token is, but the concept was, well, if really this token, this coin has utility, it's not an investment, it's used to pay for something, then that's not a security, right? So in this case, I think it was a restaurant app, and they were going to be developing tokens to use for restaurants to pay for advertising in the app, to be able to buy services through the app. They issued a white paper. They went out and did an ICO. The SEC the next day issued a cease and desist order. The company voluntarily shut it down. Anybody who'd invested got their money back right away. So there were no criminal charges or no enforcement action filed. This was not a fraud case. But really, it shows the SEC applying the Howey test to utility tokens. And again, this is just really, there's one thing I can stress, it's substance over form. It doesn't matter what you call it, just go back to the Howey test, that's what the SEC is going to do. So even though there were utility aspects to the tokens, you could use them to purchase or sell goods, there was still an expectation of profit. It was marketed that way to investors, that you're going to make money on this as we build out the system, your tokens are going to become more valuable. And again, it was the expectation of profits from the efforts of others, that you were just passively holding the token while the company was out there building up this ecosystem, creating the app. And so again, a late arriving utility doesn't really help here. And I can talk a little bit about I know you mentioned this earlier, that SAFs are kind of a thing that's safe, but for tokens. And this is, I mean, as a securities and corporate lawyer, I hate safes. I feel like these things just kind of take on a life of their own, and people hear the term, and it has some like buzz around it, and so everyone starts throwing the term around. The SAF concept is that, well, okay, so the document, the simple agreement for future tokens or simple agreement for future equity, that's an investment contract, that's a security. So we're making a securities transaction and taking your money now, then we're going to build up the ecosystem, and then you're going to get a token. Well, at that point, that token's not a security because we've already built up the ecosystem. So the value is already there, and then it really just is a utility token. Well, the SEC has issued some guidance that basically says, yeah, that's not going to get you around this issue. That unless the system is so big that it's like Bitcoin or Ether, it's so decentralized, it's still a company that's maintaining that ecosystem. If the company doesn't manage things right, the value of your token's going to go down. So even if the system has already been built up, and yeah, you can just use the token to buy and sell things in the app, the SEC still might consider that to be a security, and therefore it's restricted. Yeah.
So you're basically saying Ethereum and Bitcoin are getting a pass, and everyone else is screwed.
Because it has to do with just, is it a security or
How
not?
big
If
is
it's
it?
big enough,
How big-
decentralized enough.
How big is decentralized? Exactly, that's the question.
Yeah, that's-
Where's that line?
Good question. Write your congressman.
Do you see a way through seeking maybe like a letter of no action from the SEC at some point that if you get large enough and decentralized enough that they could possibly issue that letter of no action and declare it as not a security?
You could, but again, this is like IRS guidance. It's not law. So it's just basically saying we're going to decline to enforce in your specific scenario. Now, do other people read those no action letters and use it to kind of try and figure out what the SEC is thinking and then advise their clients? Yes, but you can't make a guarantee that the SEC is not going to change their mind. It's all based on the specific facts and circumstances.
Actually, like to follow-up question. Have you seen any progress towards one of those examples, like a letter of no action for cryptocurrencies?
I haven't seen one issued. Again, the law lags behind the technology. This is obviously an area that the SEC is very interested in. They've created kind of a working group or a task force, they're calling it, on cryptocurrencies. There's a new unit that was just set up within the SEC that kind of has purview over the whole decentralized decentralized currencies. So they're trying to get up to speed on it. Just like the IRS, I mean, there's more and more people are making more money, and this is becoming more common. They're going to want to try and get out and regulate it. So I think it's only a matter of time.
So were you saying that there is an actual SEC directive or guidance about if a business already has a commercialized and profitable business and then wants to allow a token to transact in that already existing ecosystem, and it has a unique utility around it? It truly is like a utility token. It's not being sold as an investment for a future product. There's actually a direction that says that won't pass as a utility token?
Well, it's the limited guidance. It's the Munchie.
But Munchie was selling it as a future investment. They didn't already have a platform.
Exactly.
If a business already has a platform and wants to do this,
well, we've seen it in the SAFT context where they're basically saying that's not just because there is an existing ecosystem or the app's already been developed, that doesn't mean you're in the clear. So it depends on the specific facts and circumstances. Just I would go back again to, is there an expectation of profit? Is there an expectation, even if you're not marketing it that way, from the investor's perspective, is there an expectation that the value of that token is going to increase and that's why they're buying it? Or is it truly just to transact? Really, the guidance that we've had on utility tokens, and maybe this is on the next slide, because again, this is extremely unclear. The guidance that SEC officials have given are the utility token areas that they think would be okay are book clubs and golf club memberships. Those are the examples. Like you buy a token in a book club and you get a book. Like those are that's the guidance that we have. So again, it's a big, it's a long way to go from a book club to Bitcoin and everything in between. It's just a huge gray area.
What's any reward system? Like I've seen several companies talking about having a utility coin be issued and it's based off just giving rewards back to its users.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're saying when you said book club.
I just think you need to do the same analysis and just to understand what the risks are, because it's all a big gray area.
Because that around here.
I have a question. One of the framings was earlier, you mentioned that the SEC has made statements that Bitcoin and Ethereum maybe or purportedly were not securities.
Yes.
But when Doug was talking, the current law or the view is that they're still property and they're still, so the statements
And again, it's the context, right? So it's the IRS views them as property. The SEC officials have made public statements saying that they view Bitcoin and Ethereum as commodities and not as securities. But again, that was the SEC chairman in some House testimony in response to a question from a lawmaker.
Right.
That's not like an official statement. Another SEC, a lower level director, made some comment, in a press release or to a reporter. But again, it's not law.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. I would expect there's probably been no action taken on this, but is there any guidance in terms of DAOs, like true smart contracts that aren't owned by any singular person? How does the SEC view those?
I'm not as familiar on the smart contract piece of it, so I've not seen any SEC guidance about a smart. I wouldn't assume a smart contract would be considered a security, but again, I have not done as much research into that area. I apologize. Yep.
This might be a combo question for you and your colleague. My instinct is, the answer to this question is tax as income, but how should an issuer be taxed when they're issuing a security token?
You're right.
Yeah.
It's property.
Yeah, it's property.
Now, are they taxed as income when they're selling equity?
No.
No.
That's messed up.
And again, it's a competing regulatory framework. Each agency kind of comes at it from their own perspective and their own mandate, and there's no unifying law or anything in this area that unifies what the IRS says about it versus what the SEC says about it. So it's a bit of kind of the Wild West right now.
I know we've got some more questions. How are you doing on slides? I want to be mindful because they will kick us out at 9. We have about 10 minutes.
I think I have a couple. Why don't I talk a little bit about this new law that was passed in Wyoming this spring. This is interesting. I think some of the perspective is that Wyoming is trying to make themselves like the Delaware for cryptocurrencies, just like everyone wants to incorporate in Delaware. So there was a series of legislation passed exempting certain types of utility tokens from Wyoming state securities laws. They must be exchangeable for goods or services, not marketed as investments, some of the exact same items that you were pointing out. There are lots of different kind of boxes that you have to tick in order to be considered this exempt utility token under Wyoming law. But again, this is just state securities laws. This doesn't get you outside of federal laws or SEC regulations. So really the only place that this would give you a safe harbor is if you were doing an intrastate offering in Wyoming. So you're a Wyoming company offering only to residents of the state of Wyoming.
Their vast
Probably
population.
not using the internet to do it. So that's probably not going to be
Everyone's moved there for a year. Moved there for a year.
And so I think the last I saw, there is one company as of a few months ago that is actually kind of a certified utility token offeror in the state of Wyoming, but they're still using the 506C exemption under federal securities laws. And I believe they make crypto mining computers. Okay. So again, we fall back under the traditional securities law framework. What's going to be most applicable to most ICOs is Rule 506 or Reg A+, which we've kind of already covered. 506 is great if you're selling only to accredited investors, but then again, your tokens will likely be restricted after they're sold. And I think you brought up a great point about this, which I hadn't even considered before we were talking before this, that it's on the issuer to verify accredited investor status of everyone that they're offering and selling to. And so normally how you do that is you send out a questionnaire and the person checks the box and say, I fall under this category and I rep that I'm an accredited investor, and I sign that and I send it back to you with my check. But if you're depositing coins into a wallet, how do you even know it's connected to that person? So that is also another.
They'll be weighing in on that
Could-
at some point with their foot on the door, yeah.
Since there's so many ICOs that ban people in the United States, I know that there are many people in the US who have participated in ICOs and identified themselves as not being residents of the United States. Is that actually illegal for them, or are they just putting the ICO?
I mean, the SEC is not going to go after individual investors. Their role, their mandate is investor protection. But yes, it would be the same thing as if I, as a company issuing shares of stock, sent out questionnaires to all my potential investors, and you check the box saying, yes, I'm an accredited investor because my net worth is X, and I'm signing this statement.
But under what law is that regulated? Like, because the ICO is outside of the United States, and so the person is making a false claim to somebody outside of the United States. So they're not actually violating the law of the United States, I believe. I'm at.
I don't know what the legal requirements would be under the laws of whatever country that the ICO or the company is based, but that's just, you're lying. It's just fraud. So you would be breaching whatever record you're asked to make.
Under 506, how long are the tokens locked up for?
It's either 6 months or a year, kind of depending on the particulars of the transaction. So not a really long time, but as prices are fluctuating, it's still a pretty long time.
It's a long time in crypto time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So there's a fast track process for review of Reg A+. How fast is that?
It's a couple weeks rather than months. I know that you can you have a 21-day period before you can actually go out and start doing your roadshow and publishing your offering memorandum. So that's like a much more expedited time frame than a traditional IPO review. And there are also some kind of and again, this depends on the particular what tier you're going under and lots of other particulars of the offering, but there's a way to kind of do like a pre-filing with the SEC where you can file your offering memorandum and they'll kind of give you comments but not consider it to actually be filed. So, yeah. Okay, so words of caution. So although, the best guidance we have is probably Rule 506 or Reg A+ would seem to work in ICOs. just this evening thought of a new wrinkle if you're trying to use Rule 506. So this is not, you know, an extensively vetted regulatory framework. This is just trying to fit new circumstances into existing law. Be very wary of anybody, any lawyer telling you, oh yeah, I've done this tons of times, it's fine. No one has. And just again, it's substance over form. So calling it a utility token, calling it something else is not gonna make you fall outside of securities laws. Just go back to the Howey test. And I think I already talked about ZAPs a little bit. But again, that's just an instrument. It's not an exemption in and of itself. So the offering still has to meet an exemption. That's it.
Maybe take one or two questions and then, oh, great photos. I saw one hand.
Yeah, I had a question. So,
What was on the first
can you
slide?
leave that back up?
So the Bitly link is on the cover slide.
Oh, okay. I think people want your contact
Oh,
information
okay.
too.
And again,
but it'll
you'll-
be on the Bitly link
Yeah.
if it's on the main slide.
Okay.
Okay. Is there?
So some of these early ICOs, right, where they are probably unregistered securities offerings, and legal counsel has given the okay. What kind of liability are those lawyers going to have? I won't mention any law firms, but there's some big ones that have done a lot of ICOs.
Wilson, Cincinnati.
Well, I mean, the company could have a malpractice claim. I mean, if the SEC files enforcement action against them, they lose a bunch of money. You better believe they're going to be going after their lawyers that told them it was okay.
They're gonna get this far.
Are you familiar with Filecoin.io and
No.
how they raise money? It's the largest, supposedly the largest ICO to date. They raised $257 million through a combination of Regulation D and Regulation A plus offering. And they seem to have been within compliance of the SEC. And just as a quick comment for everyone who has an interest in this, you can write the SEC at fintech@sec.gov. They will reply to your emails and they will take your phone calls to discuss things with you.
Yep.
I had 2 calls with the SEC about utility tokens, and my daughter's a lawyer, and I discovered after reading the Howey case that, yeah, what I wanted to do was to create an investment contract and raise money, and we were going to try to do it through a pre-sale of a annual license. And they said, well, that might be a utility similar to, they use the example of a funeral home contract, which are legal, so you can discount a pre-sale. And they said that might be possible to do that. It would take a board review within the SEC, which would take months to do, and you're probably better off doing what you want to do through Regulation A, and you'll be legal, you'll be compliant, and you'll be able to do what you need to
I
do.
mean, just like anything else, you can try and make a novel argument, but it doesn't mean they're going to buy it. So
Correct.
if you try at least to make it fit within the existing framework and rules that they're familiar with, I think that's going to be the safest route.
And just one last question. What's your ballpark guesstimate on what it costs to do a Regulation A plus Tier 2 offering?
30.
I would say closer to $100,000. I mean, I would think if you're doing kind of a broader Reg D offering with unaccredited investors, it can be $25,000 to $50,000 just to do your offering memorandum. So I would say upwards of that. It's not cheap.
Thanks.
So.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. I've been hearing that a lot of the institutional money that wants to enter the space is waiting for a more clear statement from the SEC. When do you just ballpark? When do you see that happening?
I mean, I have no idea. Again, there's no way to tell. They don't
ETF.
move quickly. You can see that the statements on this are heating up. I mean, the fact that they're creating new divisions within the SEC to cover this area is a big sign. The fact that the chairman is being asked questions about this by legislators, the fact that they're seeing so much fraud in this space makes them really interested in it. So I would assume it's going to be sooner rather than later, but again, there's just no way to tell. Anybody else? Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you want the contact information? If you go to the Bitly link, this whole deck will be the Bitly the contact information. So I think, G, if it's okay with you, Wei, we'll just leave that up for people to download. Yeah, thank you, Shannon.
Great presentation.
The Bitly link is cap sensitive, so.
Okay, sensitive for all of you non-developers in the room. Okay, sensitive. Yeah. Well, I don't want to take up any more time. Let's go ahead and network. Those of you that heard about job offerings, looking for things, and then feel free to come and connect with Doug and Shane after. Thank you for coming out, everybody. Thank you.
You're the ringer in the audience.
Yeah, well, I shoot.
Yes, I did.